Welcome to a life-changing audio journey. What you're about to hear is not just a collection of words. It's a healing experience, a guide to help you rewire your brain, stop overthinking, and begin your emotional healing. Over the next 12 chapters, you will explore stories, strategies, and insights designed to support trauma recovery, inner peace, and mental clarity. You don't need to take notes. Just breathe, listen. Let the words reach the parts of you that need comfort, strength, and hope. Whenever you're ready, we'll begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The hidden wounds we all carry. Beneath the surface of our daily lives, we all carry invisible scars that shape how we see the world and ourselves. In the following pages, we'll explore the emotional wounds we've learned to hide, discovering how your brain's protective mechanisms work and revealing the profound hope that lies in neuroplasticity, your mind's ability to heal itself. Maria looked like she had it all together. Successful career, loving family, warm smile that lit up every room. But at night, when the world went quiet, she would lie awake feeling a hollowness she couldn't name, a weight she couldn't explain. A sadness that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. She wasn't alone in this. Millions of us walk through life carrying invisible backpacks filled with stones we've collected along the way. Some stones are heavy, losses, betrayals, moments when the world showed us its sharp edges. Others are smaller, but no less real. Harsh words that stuck, needs that went unmet, times when we felt unseen or unheard. The remarkable thing about emotional wounds is how expertly we learn to hide them, not just from others, but from ourselves. Your brain, in its infinite wisdom and desperate desire to protect you, becomes a master of disguise. Think about how you instinctively pull your hand away from a hot stove. Your brain creates that reflex to protect your body from physical harm. It does the same thing with emotional pain, building elaborate defense systems to keep you from touching those tender places inside. James discovered this after his father's death. For months, he threw himself into work, staying busy from dawn until he collapsed into bed. Friends praised his strength, his ability to carry on, but his body knew better. Headaches became his constant companion. His back ached for no reason. Sleep turned elusive. His brain had built a fortress around his grief, but fortresses built on avoidance have a way of crumbling. One ordinary Tuesday, a song on the radio, his father's favorite, broke through the walls. 20 years of unshed tears came flooding out in a grocery store parking lot. This is how hidden wounds work. They don't disappear because we ignore them. They go underground, influencing our choices, our relationships, our health in ways we don't even realize. Have you ever wondered why certain situations make you irrationally angry? Why some compliments feel impossible to accept? Why you sabotage good things just when they're getting started? These aren't character flaws. They're the echoes of old wounds, still tender to the touch. Your brain's protective mechanisms are both blessing and curse. Like an overprotective parent, it tries to shield you from pain by creating patterns of avoidance. Can't get hurt in relationships if you never let anyone close. Can't fail if you never really try. Can't be disappointed if you expect nothing. These strategies work until they don't. Until the very walls meant to protect you become the prison that keeps you from truly living. Elena learned this the hard way. After a childhood of criticism, her brain developed a brilliant strategy: perfectionism. If she could just do everything right, maybe she'd finally be enough. For years, this drove her to incredible achievements, but it also drove her to exhaustion, anxiety, and a deep sense that nothing she did was ever quite good enough. The wound wasn't the criticism itself. It was the belief her young mind created. I am only valuable when I'm perfect. This invisible wound shaped decades of her life, influencing every decision, every relationship, every quiet moment of self-reflection. But here's where the story takes a turn toward hope. For decades, scientists believed the adult brain was fixed, unchangeable. Once wounded, always wounded. Once wired, always wired. This belief has been shattered by one of the most exciting discoveries in neuroscience, neuroplasticity. Your brain isn't concrete. It's more like clay, constantly capable of being reshaped. Every thought, every experience, every moment of awareness is an opportunity to create new neural pathways. The wounds are real, but they don't have to be permanent. Dr. Sarah Chen witnessed this firsthand in her practice. Patient after patient came to her carrying wounds that seemed insurmountable. Childhood trauma, devastating losses, betrayals that shattered their ability to trust. Yet with patience and the right approaches, she watched their brains literally rewire themselves. One patient, Robert, came to her after years of panic attacks stemming from a car accident. Brain scans showed his amygdala, the fear center, lighting up like a Christmas tree at the slightest trigger. But after months of targeted therapy, new scans showed something remarkable. New neural pathways had formed, creating alternate routes around the trauma. His brain had built new roads when the old ones were too damaged to travel. This is the miracle you carry within you right now. Your brain's ability to heal itself, to form new connections, to literally change its structure based on your experiences and practices. You're not stuck with the brain you have. You're constantly creating the brain you're becoming. But healing requires something that our protective mechanisms resist: acknowledgement. You can't heal what you won't feel. You can't change what you won't acknowledge. The first step isn't fixing, it's seeing. Catherine discovered this during a meditation retreat. For years, she'd pushed through life with relentless positivity, never allowing herself to feel anything negative. But in the silence of meditation, the feelings she'd exiled came knocking. Sadness from her parents' divorce, anger at being overlooked for promotions, fear of being truly seen. At first, she wanted to run, but her teacher offered different wisdom. What you resist persists. What you feel, you can heal. So she stayed. She felt. And in feeling, something shifted. The wounds didn't magically disappear, but they lost their power to control her from the shadows. Brought into the light of awareness, they became just another part of her story, not her entire identity. Your hidden wounds aren't weaknesses. They're evidence of your survival. Every defense mechanism, every protective wall, every pattern of avoidance was your psyche's best attempt to keep you safe. They served you once. The question now is whether they're still serving you or whether it's time for an upgrade. The beautiful truth about neuroplasticity is that it's never too late. Whether your wounds are fresh or decades old, whether they came from a single moment or years of accumulated pain, your brain retains its capacity to heal and change. This doesn't mean erasing the past. It means changing your relationship with it. It means taking the wounds that once controlled you from the shadows and transforming them into sources of wisdom, compassion, and strength. Marcus spent 50 years believing he was just not a feelings person. His military father had taught him that emotions were weakness, and he'd built his life on that foundation. But when his daughter had her first child, something cracked open. Holding his granddaughter, he felt tears he'd held back for half a century. Instead of pushing them away, he let them flow. And in that allowing, he discovered that his emotions weren't enemies to be conquered, but messengers carrying important information. The wound of emotional suppression began to heal, one tear at a time. The journey of recognizing your hidden wounds isn't about wallowing or blame. It's about honest acknowledgement that leads to transformation. It's about understanding that the parts of you that feel broken might actually be the places where the light gets in. Every person you meet is carrying invisible wounds. The angry customer, the distant partner, the perfectionist colleague, the anxious friend. We're all walking around with our hidden hurts, doing our best to navigate a world that often feels too sharp for our tender hearts. But we're also all carrying the seed of our own healing. In the darkness of our wounds lies the potential for our greatest growth. In our broken places lies the possibility of becoming whole in a new way, not perfect, but integrated. Not unscarred, but wise. Sophie realized this after years of therapy. I used to hate my sensitivity, she shared. I saw it as the wound that made me weak. But now I see it as the gift that helps me connect deeply with others. My wound became my strength, but only after I stopped trying to hide it. Before we continue our journey together, let me leave you with this truth. Your wounds are real, but they don't have to be your destiny. Your brain's incredible capacity for change means that healing is always possible. The pain you've carried doesn't have to be the pain you keep carrying. In acknowledging your hidden wounds, you take the first brave step toward transforming them from sources of suffering into wellsprings of wisdom and strength. Chapter 2. When your mind becomes your enemy, breaking free from overthinking. The mind that once protected you can become a prison of endless thoughts, trapping you in cycles of worry and what-ifs. This chapter reveals how overthinking hijacks your peace and provides practical pathways to reclaim control over your runaway thoughts. At 3 a.m., Rachel lay in bed, her mind racing through tomorrow's presentation for the 100th time. Each mental rehearsal spawned new disasters. What if she forgot her words? What if they asked questions she couldn't answer? What if everyone saw through her carefully constructed competence? By morning, she had lived through 50 different failures, none of which had actually happened. This is the cruel irony of overthinking. In trying to protect ourselves from future pain, we create present suffering. We become time travelers, living in tomorrows that may never come, rehearsing conversations that may never happen, solving problems that may never exist. Michael called it his mental hamster wheel. A successful architect by day, he became a prisoner of his own thoughts by night. One small mistake at work would trigger an avalanche. His mind would replay the error, then imagine his colleagues discussing it, then picture himself getting fired, losing his home, disappointing his family. Within minutes, a minor miscalculation had become a life-ending catastrophe in his mind. Your brain thinks it's helping. It believes that if it can just think through every possible scenario, analyze every potential outcome, it can keep you safe. But overthinking isn't thinking. It's anxiety wearing the disguise of productivity. When you're caught in rumination cycles, your mind becomes like a broken record, playing the same worries on repeat. Each loop deepens the groove, making it harder to break free. You're not solving problems. You're rehearsing pain. Sarah discovered this after her divorce. Every night, her mind would replay conversations with her ex-husband. What she should have said, what she could have done differently, the signs she should have seen. 3 years later, she was still having arguments with someone who had already moved on with his life. "Why can't I stop thinking about it?" she asked, exhausted from battles fought entirely in her head. The answer lies in how trauma and emotional pain rewire your brain's default mode. When you've been hurt, your mind becomes hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats. It's like having a security system that's too sensitive. It goes off when a leaf brushes the window. This hypervigilance manifests as overthinking. Your brain, trying to protect you from being blindsided again, attempts to predict and prevent every possible form of future pain. It's exhausting work that never ends because there's always another what if waiting around the corner. The patterns of overthinking follow predictable paths. There's the spiral of rumination, where past events play on endless loop. Anna found herself trapped in this after a friendship ended badly. Every day, she would revisit their last conversation, finding new meanings in old words, discovering hidden insults in innocent comments, building a case against someone who wasn't even thinking about her anymore. Then, there's anticipatory anxiety, where your mind writes horror stories about the future. David became an expert at this after losing his job. Every interview became a mental minefield. He would imagine every possible question, every potential wrong answer, every way he could fail. By the time he walked into actual interviews, he had already failed them 50 times in his mind. Catastrophic thinking takes this even further. It's not just imagining things going wrong. It's imagining them going wrong in the worst possible way. Like Emma, who couldn't let her teenage daughter drive to school without imagining car accidents in vivid detail. Her mind would jump from she's 5 minutes late to planning a funeral. These patterns share a common thread. They all involve your mind trying to control the uncontrollable through thinking. It's like trying to change the weather by worrying about rain. But here's what your overthinking mind doesn't want you to know. Most of what you worry about never happens. And the things that do happen, they're rarely as bad as your mind predicted. Your imagination is almost always worse than reality. Lisa learned this the hard way. She spent 6 months dreading a medical procedure, her mind creating elaborate scenarios of everything that could go wrong. When the day finally came, the procedure took 20 minutes and was far less painful than her months of mental preparation. I suffered for 6 months for 20 minutes of discomfort, she realized. My mind was the real source of pain. Breaking free from overthinking isn't about emptying your mind or stopping thoughts. That's impossible and not even desirable. It's about changing your relationship with your thoughts. It's about learning that just because you think something doesn't make it true, important, or worthy of your attention. Think of your thoughts like clouds passing through the sky. You don't have to chase every cloud, analyze its shape, or predict where it's going. You can simply notice it and let it pass. One powerful technique is what therapists call cognitive diffusion, learning to step back and observe your thoughts rather than being consumed by them. When Marcus learned this, he started prefacing his worries with, "I'm having the thought that..." It seems simple, but it created crucial distance. "I'm going to fail" became, "I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail." One statement is a fact, the other is just a mental event. Another pathway out is through the body. When you're stuck in your head, dropping into physical sensation can break the cycle. Rebecca discovered this accidentally. During a particularly intense spiral about her son's college applications, she spilled hot tea on her hand. The sudden physical sensation snapped her out of hours of mental loops. She began using ice cubes, cold water, or intense exercise to pull herself out of overthinking spirals. The practice of worry time helped Jennifer manage her racing thoughts. Instead of letting worry consume her entire day, she scheduled it. From 6 AM to 6:15 p.m., I'll worry as much as I want, she decided. When anxious thoughts arose during the day, she'd tell them, "Not now, we have an appointment later." Surprisingly, when worry time arrived, she often found she had nothing urgent to think about. Your overthinking mind will resist these changes. It will tell you that worrying keeps you safe, that analyzing protects you, that you need to think through everything just one more time. This is the anxiety talking, not wisdom. Real safety doesn't come from thinking through every possible scenario. It comes from trusting your ability to handle whatever actually happens. It comes from presence, not prediction. Daniel discovered this after years of overthinking destroyed his sleep and nearly his marriage. He started a simple practice. When caught in mental loops, he would name 5 things he could see, 4 things he could hear, 3 things he could feel, 2 things he could smell, and 1 thing he could taste. This 5-4-3-2-1 technique pulled him out of tomorrow's imagined disasters and back into today's actual life. I realized I had been so busy preparing for terrible futures that I was missing my beautiful present, he said. The journey from overthinking to peace isn't about perfection. You'll still have moments where your mind runs wild, where worry takes the wheel. That's human. The difference is that now you'll recognize what's happening. You'll have tools. You'll know that thoughts are just thoughts, not prophecies or commands. Remember, your mind learned to overthink as a form of protection. It's trying to help, even when it hurts. Meeting it with compassion rather than criticism is part of the healing. You're not broken for overthinking. You're someone who learned to survive by staying vigilant. Now you're learning that you can be safe without being constantly on guard. Each time you catch yourself in a spiral and gently redirect, each time you choose presence over prediction, you're rewiring your brain for peace. You're teaching your mind that it can rest, that not every thought needs investigation, that some questions are better left unasked. The path from mental enemy to mental ally is walked one moment at a time. Your mind may have become a battlefield, but it can become a sanctuary again. It just needs your patience, your practice, and your permission to finally rest from its exhausting vigilance. If you take only one thing from this chapter, let it be this. Your thoughts don't define you. Your worries don't protect you. And your mind, even when it feels like your enemy, is really just a frightened friend trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how. Teaching it new ways, that's where freedom lives. Chapter 3. The Body Keeps Score. Physical Symptoms of Emotional Pain. Your body never lies. While your mind can rationalize, deny, and forget, your body remembers every moment of pain, storing emotional wounds as physical symptoms. Throughout this chapter, we'll uncover how unprocessed emotions manifest in mysterious aches, chronic conditions, and unexplained illnesses, and discover the profound healing that comes from reconnecting mind and body. Rachel had seen 12 doctors in 3 years, chronic migraines, unexplained stomach pain, a back that seized up without warning. Test after test came back normal. "It's all in your head," one doctor told her dismissively. He was both completely wrong and accidentally right. The pain was real, devastatingly real, but its roots weren't in her tissues or organs. They were in the memories her body held, memories of a childhood where love came with conditions, where mistakes meant silence, where she learned to swallow her words, her needs, her very self. Your body is a living library of every experience you've ever had. Joy lives in your cells just as surely as trauma does. But when emotions get trapped, when pain goes unexpressed, your body starts speaking in the only language it knows: symptoms. Think about what happens when you're anxious. Your shoulders creep toward your ears. Your jaw clenches. Your breathing becomes shallow. Now imagine maintaining that tension, not for minutes, but for years. This is how emotional pain becomes chronic physical pain. Dr. Marcus Chen spent 20 years as an emergency physician before his own body forced him to understand this truth. Despite his medical knowledge, he couldn't explain why his chest would tighten every Sunday evening, why his left shoulder chronically ached despite no injury, why sleep became his enemy. It wasn't until his divorce that the pattern revealed itself. Sunday evenings were when his father would return from weekend drinking binges. The left shoulder pain began after years of turning away from his wife's attempts at connection. His insomnia started when he stopped feeling safe enough to truly rest. "I could read x-rays and blood tests," he later reflected, "but I couldn't read the story my own body was telling." This is the phenomenon of somatization. Your body taking emotional pain and converting it into physical symptoms. It's not imaginary. It's not weakness. It's your nervous system's attempt to discharge energy that has nowhere else to go. Have you noticed how certain emotions seem to live in specific parts of your body? Grief often settles in the chest, creating a literal heartache. Fear tightens the throat. Anger burns in the belly. Shame makes you want to physically shrink, pulling your shoulders forward, making yourself smaller. Sarah discovered this connection in a yoga class, of all places. For years, she'd carried tension in her hips so severe that simple stretches brought tears, not from physical pain, but from the emotions stored there. As her instructor guided her through hip-opening poses, memories surfaced. The assault she'd never reported, the shame she'd carried silently, the rage she'd deemed too dangerous to feel. With each breath, each gentle movement, Her body began releasing what it had held for so long. The tears came first, then trembling, then finally, relief. Her chronic hip pain, which no amount of physical therapy had touched, began to ease as she allowed her body to tell its story. This isn't mystical thinking, it's biology. When you experience trauma or intense emotion, your body mobilizes for survival. Stress hormones flood your system, muscles tense for action. But if that energy isn't discharged, if the emotion isn't processed, it gets trapped. Your body remains in a state of partial activation, like a smoke alarm that never quite stops beeping. Lisa learned this after her mother's death. The grief she couldn't express lodged in her throat. Speaking became painful. Doctors found nothing wrong with her vocal cords, but her body knew what her mind could need accept. She had lost her voice long before her mother died, in a family where her feelings were too much, too inconvenient, too messy to be heard. The science behind this is fascinating and validating. Studies show that people with unresolved trauma have higher rates of autoimmune conditions, chronic pain, and inflammatory diseases. The same nervous system that's hypervigilant for emotional threats creates inflammation in the body. The same muscles that brace against psychological pain develop chronic tension patterns. Dr. Rebecca Martinez saw this repeatedly in her pain clinic. Patients would come seeking relief from fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome. Traditional treatments would provide minimal relief, but when they began addressing the emotional pain underneath, something shifted. Not overnight, not magically, but consistently. One patient, Michael, had lived with debilitating back pain since his business failed. Every treatment failed because they were treating the wrong wound. His back wasn't broken, his heart was. When he finally allowed himself to grieve the loss of his dreams, to feel the shame he'd been carrying, his back began to release its death grip. Your body holds wisdom that your mind has forgotten. Every symptom is a messenger, trying to get your attention, trying to tell you what needs healing. But we live in a culture that teaches us to silence these messengers with pills, procedures, distractions. We treat the smoke alarm instead of the fire. The path to healing involves learning your body's language. Jennifer discovered this through mindful body scanning. Each night, she would lie quietly and check in with each part of her body, not to fix or change anything, just to listen. Her chronic neck pain, she realized, intensified whenever she felt unsupported. Her stomach issues flared when she swallowed her truth to keep peace. Her insomnia peaked when she felt unsafe in her own life. Once she understood the language, she could address the real issues. This doesn't mean abandoning medical care. Physical symptoms deserve physical attention, but it means expanding our understanding of what creates illness and what creates healing. It means recognizing that your body and mind aren't separate entities, but parts of an integrated whole. Movement becomes medicine when approached this way. Not punishing exercise that forces your body into submission, but gentle movement that allows trapped energy to flow. Dance that lets you shake off old trauma. Walking that helps you literally move forward. Stretching that creates space where you've been constricted. Thomas found his healing through swimming. After his son's death, grief had turned his body into a prison of tension. But in the water, something loosened. The rhythmic breathing, the weightlessness, the primal return to an element that held him without judgment. With each stroke, he wasn't just moving through water, he was moving through grief. Breathwork, too, becomes a bridge between mind and body. Your breath is the only bodily function under both conscious and unconscious control. By changing how you breathe, you can shift your nervous system from fight or flight to rest and digest. You can literally breathe your way from anxiety to calm, from tension to release. Anna discovered this after years of panic attacks. Medication helped, but breath transformed. Learning to breathe deeply into her belly, to extend her exhales, to pause between breaths. These simple practices did what years of thinking couldn't. They convinced her body it was safe. The journey from body as enemy to body as ally requires patience and compassion. Many of us have learned to distrust our bodies, to see symptoms as betrayals rather than communications. But your body has been trying to protect you the only way it knows how. It deserves gratitude, not punishment. Patricia's story illustrates this beautifully. After years of chronic fatigue that began during an abusive marriage, she initially hated her body for its weakness. But as she began practicing self-compassion, touching her skin with kindness, speaking to her body with gratitude, something shifted. "I realized my fatigue wasn't weakness," she shared. "It was my body's way of forcing me to rest when I didn't know how to stop. It was protecting me from complete burnout." Healing happens when we stop fighting our bodies and start collaborating with them. When we recognize that physical symptoms often carry emotional messages. When we understand that the body keeps score, but it's also willing to settle accounts when we approach it with understanding and care. Simple practices can begin this healing. Placing a hand on your heart when you're distressed. Taking 3 deep breaths when tension rises. Noticing where emotions live in your body without trying to fix them. These small acts of attention and kindness begin rewiring the connection between mind and body. As we close this chapter, I invite you to consider this. Your body is not your enemy, even when it hurts. It's your oldest friend, your most honest companion, the keeper of your stories. Every symptom is an invitation to deeper healing. Every pain point is a map to what needs attention. Listen with curiosity instead of judgment, and your body will show you the way home to wholeness. Chapter 4. Why you can't just get over it. Understanding trauma responses. When trauma strikes, the brain rewires itself for survival, creating responses that logic alone cannot override. This chapter explores why healing requires more than willpower, revealing how your nervous system's protective mechanisms work and why understanding them is the first step toward true recovery. Sarah sat in her therapist's office, frustrated tears streaming down her face. "Everyone keeps telling me to just move on," she said, her voice breaking. "They say it's been 2 years since the accident. They say I should be over it by now." But trauma doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't care about calendars or well-meaning advice. What Sarah's friends didn't understand, what most people don't understand, is that trauma responses aren't choices. They're not weaknesses. They're survival mechanisms hardwired into the deepest parts of your brain. When you experience trauma, your nervous system doesn't just file it away like a normal memory. It creates a whole new operating system designed to keep you safe. This is why you can't simply think your way out of trauma responses. It's like trying to use logic to stop your heart from beating faster when you're scared. The ancient part of your brain, the part that kept your ancestors alive when saber-toothed tigers roamed the earth, doesn't speak the language of reason. It speaks the language of survival. Have you ever wondered why certain situations make your heart race, even when you know you're safe? Why some memories feel as fresh as if they happened yesterday, not years ago? Your body is trying to protect you, using the only tools it knows. The survival responses your nervous system creates fall into 4 main categories, often remembered as the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Marcus discovered his fight response the hard way. A normally gentle teacher, he found himself snapping at students after witnessing violence in his neighborhood. His nervous system, stuck in protection mode, interpreted every raised hand as a potential threat. He wasn't choosing anger. His body was choosing survival. Elena's trauma manifested as flight. After a difficult relationship ended, she couldn't stay in one job, one apartment, one friendship for long. The moment things felt too close, too real, her feet were already out the door. Running felt safer than risking hurt again. Then there's the freeze response, perhaps the most misunderstood of all. David sat in meetings, unable to speak when his boss's tone reminded him of his critical father. Words would disappear, Thoughts would scatter. His colleagues thought he didn't care. In reality, his nervous system had hit the emergency brake, immobilizing him to survive what it perceived as danger. The fawn response is the chameleon of trauma responses. Like Lisa, who smiled through every insult, agreed to every demand, shape-shifted into whatever others needed her to be. After years of childhood neglect, her nervous system learned that becoming invisible, becoming agreeable, meant survival. She didn't choose to lose herself. She chose to survive. These responses aren't flaws in your character. They're evidence of your incredible capacity to adapt and survive. Your nervous system did exactly what it was designed to do. It kept you alive. But here's what makes healing so challenging. Your logical brain and your survival brain speak entirely different languages. It's like having a smoke alarm that won't stop beeping even after the fire is out. You can stand there all day explaining to the alarm that everything is fine now, but it won't listen. It only knows one job: detect danger and sound the alert. This is why well-meaning advice like, just think positive, or stop dwelling on the past, falls so painfully short. You might as well tell someone to stop their pupils from dilating in the dark. These are automatic responses, below the level of conscious control. When Jessica's husband would raise his voice, even in excitement about a football game, her body would respond as if under attack. Her heart would race, her muscles would tense, her breathing would become shallow. She knew, logically, that she was safe. She knew her husband would never hurt her, but her body remembered another voice, another time, when raised voices meant danger. Why can't I just get over this? She would ask herself, adding shame on top of pain. The answer lies in understanding how trauma changes the brain itself. When you experience something overwhelming, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes hypervigilant. It starts seeing danger everywhere, like a security guard who's been robbed one too many times. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, reasoning, and putting things in perspective, goes offline during trauma. It's like trying to do complex math while running from a bear. Your brain prioritizes survival over analysis. This is why you can know something is ontological and still feel it with every fiber of your being. This is why you can tell yourself 1,000 times that you're safe now, but your body won't believe you. Recovery isn't about overriding these responses through sheer willpower. It's about gently teaching your nervous system that the danger has passed. It's about building new pathways that run alongside the old ones, offering your brain alternatives to its well-worn survival routes. Think of it like this. Trauma creates a deep groove in your neural pathways, like water carving a canyon over time. You can't fill in the canyon, but you can create new paths for the water to flow. With time and practice, these new paths can become the preferred routes. This is why healing happens in the body, not just the mind. It's why you might need to shake, to cry, to move, to breathe in new ways. Your body needs to complete the survival responses that got interrupted, to discharge the energy that got trapped. Thomas learned this after years of trying to think his way out of panic attacks. All the logic in the world couldn't stop his racing heart when he heard sirens. Sounds that took him back to the night of his accident. But when he started working with his body, allowing himself to shake, teaching his nervous system through breathing exercises that he was safe, something began to shift. The panic didn't disappear overnight, but slowly the sirens became just sirens again, not time machines dragging him back to his worst moment. Your trauma responses are not your enemy. They're outdated security systems that need gentle updating, not harsh overriding. They're evidence of your strength, not your weakness. They show that you survived something that at the time felt unsurvivable. Understanding this changes everything. It transforms healing from a battle against yourself into a collaboration with yourself. It turns "why can't I just get over it?" into "what does my nervous system need to feel safe?" The path forward isn't about forgetting or forcing. It's about befriending your body's wisdom while gently showing it new possibilities. It's about honoring the part of you that fought so hard to keep you alive while teaching it that it can rest now. Some days will be harder than others. Some triggers will catch you off guard. But each time you meet yourself with understanding instead of judgment, each time you work with your nervous system instead of against it, you're rewiring your brain for healing. You're not broken for having trauma responses. You're human. And the same nervous system that learned to protect you can learn to help you thrive. It just needs patience, compassion, and the revolutionary understanding that healing isn't about getting over it. It's about moving through it, with every part of you included in the journey. If you take only one thing from this chapter, let it be this: your survival responses brought you this far. Now, with understanding and gentle practice, they can help carry you home to yourself. The journey isn't about leaving them behind. It's about updating them for the life you're living now, not the one you survived. Chapter 5. Breaking the Cycle. Inherited Pain and Family Patterns. The wounds we carry often began long before we were born, passed down through generations like invisible heirlooms. Join me as we uncover how trauma travels through family lines, why we unconsciously repeat patterns that hurt us, and most importantly, how you can become the one who finally breaks these ancient cycles. Maria stared at her teenage daughter in shock. The words that had just come out of her own mouth were her mother's words, the exact tone, the same cutting edge, words she'd sworn she'd never say. Yet here they were, traveling through time, using her voice as their vehicle. She wasn't alone in this haunting realization. Millions of us find ourselves acting out scripts we never consciously learned, repeating patterns we desperately tried to escape, becoming the very thing we promised we'd never be. This is the nature of generational trauma. It doesn't require words to be transmitted. It travels through tone of voice, through what's not said, through the nervous system of a stressed parent to the developing nervous system of a child. It's downloaded before we can speak, encoded before we can think, shaping us before we even know there's something to resist. Roberto discovered this when he became a father. Despite his best intentions, he found himself withdrawing emotionally from his son, just as his father had withdrawn from him. His father had learned it from his grandfather, who'd returned from war changed, unreachable. 3 generations of men loving their children desperately, but unable to bridge the gap created by unprocessed pain. Have you ever caught yourself in a moment of horrifying recognition, hearing your parents' voice in your own? Feeling patterns you thought you'd escaped pulling you back like invisible chains? This isn't weakness or failure. This is how deeply trauma embeds itself in family systems. The science behind this is both fascinating and validating. Researchers have found that trauma can actually alter genetic expression, affecting how genes are turned on or off. These changes can be passed to children and even grandchildren. Your grandmother's trauma might literally be written in your cells, but it goes beyond genetics. Families are systems, and systems seek balance, even dysfunctional balance. When one generation can't process their pain, they unconsciously pass it to the next, like a game of emotional hot potato that spans decades. Dr. Elena Vasquez saw this pattern repeatedly in her family therapy practice. The anxious mother who couldn't understand why her daughter developed an eating disorder. Dig deeper, and you'd find the grandmother who survived famine. The body remembers starvation even generations later, hoarding food or rejecting it, trying to solve a problem that no longer exists. The angry father who couldn't stop criticizing his son. Trace it back, and you'd find the grandfather whose own father's criticism was the only attention he ever received. Love and pain became so intertwined that one couldn't be expressed without the other. These patterns are particularly insidious because they feel normal. When you grow up in water, you don't know you're wet. When dysfunction is your baseline, health feels foreign, even threatening. Sophie realized this in her 30s. She kept dating emotionally unavailable men, convinced each time that she could earn their love through perfect behavior. It wasn't until therapy that she recognized the pattern. She was recreating her relationship with her emotionally distant mother, trying to get a different ending to an old story. I was casting every partner in my mother's role, she reflected, hoping this time I'd be good enough to be truly seen. This is how family patterns persist. We unconsciously seek the familiar even when the familiar hurts. We're drawn to what we know, trying to master old situations with new people. The abandoned child grows up to choose partners who abandon. The criticized child becomes an adult who can't escape critical relationships, not because we enjoy pain, but because we're trying to heal old wounds with new bandages. The patterns show up in subtle ways too. The family that never talks about feelings raises children who struggle with emotional intimacy. The family that values achievement over connection produces adults who feel worthless without constant accomplishment. The family that fears conflict creates members who'd rather suffer in silence than speak their truth. But here's where hope enters the story. You can be the one who breaks the cycle, not through perfection, but through consciousness. Not by never making mistakes, but by making different mistakes than the ones that came before. James decided to be that person in his family line. His father had been violent. His grandfather had been violent. As far back as anyone could remember, the men in his family had expressed their pain through their fists. When James felt that familiar rage rising with his own son, he made a different choice. He walked away. He sought therapy. He learned to feel the feelings his father and grandfather had never been allowed to feel. Fear, sadness, vulnerability. The emotions that had been forbidden to men in his family for generations. It wasn't easy. Breaking patterns never is. There were days when the old programming felt stronger than his new intentions. But with each different choice, each moment of consciousness, he was literally rewiring his family's future. His son would grow up seeing a man who could be strong and gentle, who could feel without exploding, who could apologize when wrong. The cycle, generations in the making, was finally breaking. Breaking generational patterns requires radical honesty. It means looking at your family system without rose-colored glasses or black-tinted ones. Seeing the pain without demonizing those who carried it. Understanding that your parents gave you what they received, and their parents did the same. This isn't about blame. Blame keeps us stuck in the pattern. It's about understanding. When you understand why your mother couldn't show affection, you stop taking it personally. When you see that your father's criticism came from his own deep insecurity, you can stop trying to prove your worth to echoes of his pain. Rebecca discovered this when she mapped her family patterns. The women in her family had been caretakers for generations, sacrificing themselves for others until there was nothing left. Her great-grandmother for her husband, her grandmother for her children, her mother for everyone but herself. Rebecca saw how she was walking the same path, exhausted from giving, resentful but unable to stop. The pattern was so deep she couldn't imagine another way of being valuable. But awareness was the first crack in the foundation of this ancient structure. The process of breaking cycles often involves grieving. Grieving the childhood you needed but didn't get. Grieving the parents you wished for but didn't have. Grieving the generations of pain that led to your pain. Michael went through this when he realized his emotional numbness wasn't a personal failing but a family inheritance. His grandfather had shut down after losing a child. His father had never learned to open up. By the time the pattern reached Michael, emotional unavailability was the only model of masculinity he knew. The grief came in waves, for his grandfather's unprocessed loss, for his father's unreachable heart, for his own children, who were getting only a fraction of the father he could be. But with grief came freedom, the freedom to choose differently. He started small, telling his kids he loved them every day, something he'd never heard from his own father, staying present when emotions arose instead of disappearing into work. learning to cry decades after tears had been trained out of him. The beautiful truth about breaking generational patterns is that healing ripples in all directions. When you heal yourself, you heal your family line backward and forward. You release your ancestors from being the source of your pain. You free your children from inheriting what wounded you. Patricia experienced this profoundly. After years of therapy addressing her mother's emotional abuse, she had a realization. Her mother had been doing to her what had been done to her mother, and probably to her grandmother before that. A long line of women wounded by women who were wounded by women. I saw my mother not as my tormentor, but as another link in a chain of pain, Patricia shared, and I decided the chain would break with me. She chose not to have children until she'd done her healing work. When her daughter was born, Patricia was ready, not perfect but conscious, not unbroken, but healing. The pattern that had shaped generations of women in her family would find no foothold in this new life. Breaking cycles doesn't mean you'll never make mistakes. It means you'll make new mistakes, conscious mistakes, mistakes you can own and repair. It means when the old patterns arise, because they will, you'll recognize them, you'll pause, you'll choose. My invitation to you as we close this chapter is this: you are not doomed to repeat what came before you. The patterns that shaped your family can end with you. Every conscious choice you make, every pattern you interrupt, every cycle you break is an act of love. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who came before and everyone who comes after. You have the power to be the one who changes everything. Chapter 6. The Inner Child. Healing your younger self. Deep within every adult lives a child who still needs what they never received. Prepare to meet the younger version of yourself, who's been waiting all these years for someone to finally listen, to finally care, to finally say the words that were never spoken. This chapter will guide you through the profound journey of reparenting yourself and giving your inner child the love they've always deserved. David was 43 years old, a successful CEO, when he found himself sobbing on his office floor. The trigger? His assistant had forgotten to order his lunch. But it wasn't about the lunch. It was never about the lunch. In that moment, he wasn't a powerful executive. He was 7 years old again, forgotten at school, waiting for a parent who never came. The hunger in his belly mixing with the deeper hunger of a child who learned too early that his needs didn't matter. This is the power of the inner child. No matter how old we get, how successful we become, how much we achieve, there's a part of us frozen in time. A part that still experiences the world through the eyes of the child we once were. And until we turn toward that child with the love they needed then, we remain incomplete. Sarah discovered her inner child during a meditation retreat. The instruction was simple: visualize yourself as a child. What she saw broke her heart. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting alone in a corner, arms wrapped around her knees, waiting for someone to notice she was hurting. I realized I'd been ignoring her the same way everyone else had, Sarah whispered through tears. 30 years later, she was still waiting. Your inner child isn't a metaphor or a psychological concept. It's a living part of your psyche, carrying the wounds, the fears, the unmet needs of your younger self. When you were small and the world was too big, too harsh, too confusing, parts of you stopped developing. They went into hiding, waiting for safety that never came. Think about your triggers, the things that make you react in ways that seem disproportionate to the situation. Often it's not the adult responding, it's the child. The criticism that sends you spiraling? You're not hearing your boss. You're hearing the parent who said you'd never amount to anything. The rejection that devastates you? You're not feeling today's no. You're feeling every time you reached for love and found emptiness. Marcus learned this in therapy when exploring his workaholic tendencies. On the surface, he was driven, ambitious, successful. Underneath, he was a 10-year-old boy still trying to earn his father's approval. every achievement was an offering laid at the feet of a man who'd been dead for 15 years. I was killing myself trying to impress a ghost, he realized. And even if my father were alive, no amount of success could fill a hole that was never about success in the first place. The wounds of childhood cut deep because children are meaning-making machines. When bad things happen to adults, we have context, perspective, the ability to understand that it's not our fault. Children don't have these tools. When a parent is cruel, absent, or inconsistent, a child doesn't think, "Something's wrong with my parent." They think, "Something's wrong with me." These childhood conclusions become the hidden operating system of our adult lives. I'm not lovable. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I have to be perfect to be safe. I can't trust anyone. These aren't thoughts we consciously choose. They're survival strategies created by a young mind trying to make sense of an unsafe world. Elena carried the belief, "I'm only valuable when I'm helping others," for 40 years before recognizing its origin. As the oldest of 5 children with overwhelmed parents, she'd learned early that her needs came last. That love was earned through service. That wanting anything for herself was selfish. This belief shaped every relationship, every decision. She became a nurse, a profession of service. She married a man who needed saving. She had friends who only called when they needed something. And through it all, the little girl inside her grew more and more tired, more and more invisible. Healing the inner child isn't about dwelling in the past or wallowing in old pain. It's about finally giving that child what they needed then but didn't get. It's about becoming the adult you needed when you were small. This process, called reparenting, is one of the most powerful healing tools available. It means learning to be your own good parent, to provide for yourself the safety, validation, and unconditional love that every child deserves, but not every child receives. Jennifer started this process by writing letters to her inner child. At first, she felt ridiculous, a grown woman writing to an imaginary version of herself. But as she continued, something shifted. The letters became a bridge between who she was and who she was becoming. "Dear little Jenny," she would write, "I see how scared you were. I see how hard you tried to be good enough. I want you to know that you were always enough. You were a child. It wasn't your job to keep the family together. It wasn't your fault that Mom was sad. You deserved to be loved just for existing." With each letter, she felt something inside her relax, a vigilance she'd carried for decades beginning to ease. The child inside her was finally being seen, finally being heard, finally being told the truth. The practice of inner child work often brings up intense emotions: grief for the childhood you didn't have, anger at those who failed to protect you, fear of feeling the pain you've spent a lifetime avoiding. This is normal. This is healing. The feelings you couldn't feel then need to be felt now, but this time, you're not alone. Your adult self is here to hold your child self through it. Robert discovered this when he started looking at childhood photos. In picture after picture, he saw the same thing: a little boy trying so hard to smile, to be good, to not cause trouble. He saw the tension in those small shoulders, the wariness in those young eyes. He began talking to that boy in the photos, telling him it was okay to be angry about the divorce, that it made sense he was scared when Dad's temper exploded, that he didn't have to protect Mom from her sadness, that he was allowed to be a child. "I gave him permission to feel everything I wasn't allowed to feel then," Robert shared. "And in doing so, I gave myself permission too." One of the most powerful aspects of inner child work is recognizing that the child's strategies for survival often become the adult's prison. The child who learned to be invisible to stay safe becomes an adult who can't be seen in relationships. The child who learned that anger meant danger becomes an adult who can't set boundaries. The child who was parentified becomes an adult who can't receive care. Lisa discovered this pattern in her romantic relationships. She kept choosing partners who were emotionally unavailable, then exhausting herself, trying to win their love. Through inner child work, she realized she was still the 8-year-old girl trying to make her depressed mother smile. "I was dating my mother over and over again," she said. "Different faces, same emotional unavailability, same impossible mission." The healing came when she began giving her inner child what she'd tried to get from others: attention, validation, consistent care. She started treating herself the way she wished her mother had treated her, buying herself flowers, celebrating her achievements, comforting herself when she was sad. The journey of reparenting yourself requires patience and persistence. You're essentially raising yourself from the inside out. Some days, your inner child will test you, push boundaries, throw tantrums. This is good. This means they're starting to trust that you'll stay, that you won't abandon them like others did. Michael experienced this when he started setting boundaries at work. His inner child, who'd learned that love meant never saying no, was terrified. What if everyone left? What if he ended up alone? The adult Michael had to reassure the child Michael over and over. "I'm here. I won't leave you. It's safe to have needs. It's safe to say no." Slowly, the child began to believe. And as the child healed, the adult transformed. Relationships became healthier. Work became sustainable. Life became less about survival and more about thriving. The beautiful paradox of inner child work is that by becoming a good parent to yourself, you become more capable of healthy adult relationships. You stop expecting others to fill the void left by childhood wounds. You stop recreating old patterns. You start relating from wholeness rather than neediness. Before we part ways in this chapter, remember this profound truth. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. Not the one you lived, but the one you can give yourself now. Your inner child has been waiting all this time, holding the pain so you could survive. Now it's your turn to hold them, to heal them, to love them the way they always deserve to be loved. In healing that child, you don't just change your past. You transform your present and free your future. Chapter 7. Rewiring Your Brain. Practical Neuroscience for Healing. Your brain is not fixed in stone, but alive with possibility, capable of forming new connections at any age, in any circumstance. Throughout this chapter, we'll discover the revolutionary science of neuroplasticity and learn practical exercises that literally reshape your neural pathways, transforming pain into peace, one new connection at a time. Catherine thought she was broken beyond repair. At 55, after decades of anxiety and depression, she believed her brain was set in its ways. "Old dogs can't learn new tricks," she'd say, dismissing any hope of change. Then her therapist showed her a brain scan that changed everything. The image showed two brains side by side. The first, taken at the beginning of treatment, showed areas of low activity, like a city during a blackout. The second, taken 8 months later, glowed with new connections, pathways lighting up like highways at night. Same person, same brain, transformed through consistent practice. "That's my brain?" Catherine asked, touching the screen with wonder. It was the first time she truly believed change was possible. This is the miracle of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself, to build new neural highways around old damaged roads, to literally rewire itself based on what you practice. Every thought you think, every action you take, every habit you form is shaping your brain in real time. For decades, scientists believed the adult brain was fixed, unchangeable. If you were anxious, you'd always be anxious. If trauma had wired you for hypervigilance, that was your permanent state. This belief has been thoroughly shattered. We now know the brain remains plastic, changeable, throughout our entire lives. Dr. Michael Chen witnessed this transformation countless times in his neurology practice. Stroke patients rewiring their brains to regain movement. People with chronic pain creating new neural pathways that bypassed pain signals. Individuals with severe PTSD building new networks that allowed them to feel safe again. The brain is like a garden. he would tell his patients. What you water grows. What you practice strengthens. You're not stuck with the brain you have. You're constantly creating the brain you're becoming. But here's what makes this particularly relevant for emotional healing. The same principles that help stroke patients recover movement can help you recover from emotional wounds. The same neuroplasticity that allows people to learn new languages can help you learn new ways of responding to triggers. Think about it this way. Every time you were hurt, rejected, or traumatized, your brain created neural pathways to protect you. These pathways become superhighways through repetition. The thought, "I'm not good enough," travels the same neural route so many times it becomes automatic, like a river carving a canyon. But you can build new pathways, not by trying to fill in the canyon, but by creating alternative routes. This is where practical exercises come in. Simple, consistent practices that literally change your brain's structure. Maria discovered this through a practice called cognitive reframing. For 30 years, her brain's default response to any mistake was, "You're so stupid." The neural pathway was so strong it felt like truth, but she began a simple practice. Every time the thought arose, she would pause and consciously think, "I'm learning and growing." At first, it felt fake, forced. The old pathway was a superhighway, the new one was barely a dirt road. But she persisted, day after day, mistake after mistake, consciously choosing the new thought. After 3 months, something shifted. The new thought began arising automatically. After 6 months, brain scans would have shown visible changes in her neural structure. The key is consistency. Your brain doesn't care whether a thought is true or helpful. It only cares about repetition. Whatever you practice most becomes strongest. This is both the problem and the solution. One powerful neuroplasticity exercise is called mental rehearsal. Athletes have used this for decades, but it works equally well for emotional healing. When you vividly imagine yourself responding differently to triggers, your brain activates the same regions as if you were actually doing it. James used this technique to overcome his fear of confrontation. Every morning, he would spend 10 minutes visualizing himself calmly setting boundaries. He would see himself speaking clearly, staying grounded, not apologizing for having needs. He would imagine the physical sensations, steady breathing, relaxed shoulders, firm voice. In his mind, he practiced with safe scenarios first, telling a cashier they gave incorrect change, asking a neighbor to turn down music. As he got comfortable, he visualized harder situations, disagreeing with his boss, setting limits with his mother. Each mental rehearsal was building neural pathways for real-world action. When the time came to actually set boundaries, his brain had a template. The pathways had been partially built through imagination. The real experience simply strengthened what visualization had begun. Another crucial practice is focused attention meditation. This isn't about emptying your mind or achieving bliss. It's about training your brain to stay present, to strengthen the neural networks associated with calm awareness, rather than anxious rumination. Dr. Sarah Kim studied the brains of new meditators and found visible changes in as little as 8 weeks. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, actually shrank. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for emotional regulation, grew thicker. The connection between these regions strengthened, allowing better communication between emotion and logic. "We're not talking about monks who meditate for hours," she emphasized. "These were ordinary people practicing just 20 minutes a day. That's all it takes to begin rewiring your brain. The practice is simple. Focus on your breath. When your mind wanders, which it will, gently bring attention back to breathing. Each return to the breath is like doing a bicep curl for your brain. You're strengthening the muscle of attention, weakening the habit of anxious thinking. Physical exercise is another powerful tool for neuroplasticity. When you move your body, you're not just building muscle, you're building brain. Exercise increases BDNF, often called miracle grow for the brain, which promotes the growth of new neural connections. Rebecca discovered this after years of talk therapy yielded limited results. Her therapist suggested adding movement. She began dancing, not performatively but privately, letting her body move however it wanted. Something about the combination of movement, music, and freedom unlocked what words couldn't reach. It was like my trauma was stored in my muscles, she reflected, and movement was the language my body needed to release it. Studies confirm this. Regular exercise doesn't just improve mood, it literally changes brain structure, promoting the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, the region associated with memory and emotional regulation. You're not just working out, you're rewiring. The habits that heal the brain are often surprisingly simple. Quality sleep allows the brain to consolidate new neural pathways. Think of it as saving your work. Without adequate sleep, the new connections you're building remain fragile. Nutrition matters too. The brain is only 2% of body weight, but uses 20% of your energy. Omega-3 fatty acids found in fish and walnuts are like building materials for new neural connections. Complex carbohydrates provide steady fuel. Hydration keeps the electrical system functioning. But perhaps the most powerful habit is consistency in whatever practices you choose. Robert learned this when he committed to a simple gratitude practice. Every night, 3 things he was grateful for. It seemed too simple to matter. Yet, after a year, his entire outlook had shifted. His brain, trained through repetition to look for good, had rewired itself for positivity. Depression still visited, but it no longer lived there. He had built new neural neighborhoods where joy could reside. The journey of rewiring your brain requires patience. You're not just changing thoughts, you're changing the physical structure of your brain. This takes time. Studies suggest it takes about 66 days for a new neural pathway to become automatic. That's 66 days of conscious practice before the new way becomes natural. There will be setbacks, days when the old pathways feel stronger than the new ones. This is normal. Think of it like carving a new path through a forest while an old highway still exists. Sometimes you'll find yourself on the old road before you realize it. The key is to gently redirect without self-judgment. Lisa experienced this while rewiring her response to criticism. For weeks, she practiced new thoughts, visualized different responses, meditated daily. Then her mother made one critical comment, and she spiraled like before. All that work for nothing, she thought. But her therapist offered different perspective. You notice the spiral. You're observing it rather than being consumed by it. That's huge neural change, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. She was right. Awareness precedes change. The fact that Lisa could observe her old pattern meant new neural networks were online, even if they weren't strong enough yet to override the old ones. As we reach the end of this transformative chapter, carry this truth with you. Every moment is an opportunity to rewire your brain. Every conscious thought, every mindful breath, every act of self-compassion is literally reshaping your neural landscape. You're not fighting against a fixed brain, but partnering with a living, changing organ that's designed to heal. The practices are simple. The science is clear. The power to transform your brain, and therefore your life, lies in your hands. Use it wisely, use it consistently, and watch your inner world transform. Chapter 8. From Surviving to Thriving. Building Emotional Resilience. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize you're no longer just trying to survive each day, but beginning to imagine what it might mean to truly thrive. This chapter will guide you through building the emotional resilience that transforms mere survival into a life of authentic flourishing, teaching you how to expand your capacity for both challenge and joy. Thomas sat in his therapist's office, confused by his own success. "I don't understand," he said. "Everything's finally going well. I have the job I wanted, a healthy relationship, stability. So why do I feel so anxious? Why am I waiting for it all to fall apart?" His therapist smiled knowingly. You've become an expert at surviving crisis. Now you need to learn how to live in peace. This is the paradox many trauma survivors face. When your nervous system has been tuned for danger, safety feels foreign. When you've spent years in survival mode, thriving can feel more threatening than suffering. Your body knows how to handle crisis. It doesn't know how to handle calm. But resilience isn't just about bouncing back from hardship. True resilience is about expanding your capacity to hold all of life's experiences. The joy along with the sorrow, the peace along with the pain. The ability not just to survive the storms, but to dance in the rain. Understanding emotional regulation is the foundation of moving from surviving to thriving. It's not about controlling your emotions or never feeling distressed. It's about developing the skills to move through emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Dr. Lisa Park explains it through the concept of the window of tolerance. Imagine your emotional capacity as a window. When you're within your window, you can handle stress, feel emotions, and stay connected to yourself and others. Trauma shrinks this window. What once felt manageable now feels overwhelming. Sandra discovered her window had become narrow after years of workplace abuse. A slightly raised voice would send her into panic. A minor disappointment would spiral into despair. She wasn't weak. Her nervous system had adapted to constant threat by becoming hypervigilant. I felt like I was living life through a keyhole, she described. Everything felt too big, too much, too fast. The journey to resilience involves gently expanding this window, not by forcing yourself to handle more than you can, but by slowly building your capacity through consistent, manageable challenges. Building resilience starts with understanding your nervous system's responses. When you're in survival mode, you're operating from your sympathetic nervous system. Fight, flight, or freeze. Your body is flooded with stress hormones, ready for danger. Thriving requires accessing your parasympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest, calm and connect. This isn't just a mental shift. It's a physiological one that requires practice. Marcus learned this through breathwork. For years, he'd been stuck in shallow chest breathing, his body perpetually prepared for threat. His coach introduced him to diaphragmatic breathing, slow, deep breaths that signaled safety to his nervous system. It sounds too simple to work, Marcus admitted. But within minutes, I felt my shoulders drop, my jaw unclench. My body was finally getting the message that it was safe to relax. The practice was simple. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. The extended exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system. With consistent practice, Marcus found his baseline anxiety decreasing, his window of tolerance expanding. Resilience isn't built in isolation. Humans are wired for connection, and secure relationships are one of the most powerful regulators of our nervous system. This is called co-regulation. When you're with someone calm and grounded, your nervous system naturally syncs with theirs. Emily discovered this after years of trying to heal alone. She'd read all the books, done all the exercises, but progress was limited. Then she joined a trauma support group. Being with others who understood, who could hold space for her pain without trying to fix it, changed everything. I learned that healing happens in relationship, she reflected. My nervous system needed to borrow resilience from others until I could build my own. This doesn't mean becoming dependent on others for regulation. It means recognizing that we're not meant to do this alone, that seeking support is strength, not weakness, that allowing others to witness our struggles is part of how we build resilience. The shift from surviving to thriving also involves changing your relationship with discomfort. In survival mode, all discomfort feels dangerous. The goal becomes avoiding any distress. But this avoidance actually shrinks your world and your window of tolerance. Building resilience means learning to differentiate between discomfort and danger, between challenge and threat, between growth edges and genuine harm. David learned this through cold water therapy. His therapist suggested cold showers as a way to practice being with discomfort. At first, it seemed ridiculous. How could cold water help with emotional resilience? But as he practiced, he understood. The cold was uncomfortable but not dangerous. By breathing through it, staying present with it, he was teaching his nervous system a crucial lesson. I can handle discomfort. I can stay centered even when things are unpleasant. This translated to emotional resilience. When anxiety arose, he could breathe through it like the cold. When conflict emerged in relationships, he could stay present instead of fleeing. His capacity to be with difficulty without being overwhelmed by it grew. Creating a resilient life also means building in practices that nourish your nervous system. These aren't luxuries, they're necessities for those learning to thrive after trauma. Rachel developed what she called her resilience rituals. Morning pages to clear mental clutter, evening walks to discharge the day's stress, weekly art sessions where she could express without words, monthly massage to help her body remember safe touch. I used to think self-care was selfish, she said. Now I understand it's how I maintain my capacity to show up for life. These practices aren't about perfection. Rachel didn't do all of them every day. But having a toolkit meant she had options when her window of tolerance felt narrow. She could choose what her nervous system needed in each moment. The journey from surviving to thriving also involves grieving the survivor identity. When you've been in crisis for so long, survival can become who you are, not just what you do. There's a strange comfort in chaos when it's all you've known. Patricia faced this when her life stabilized. I didn't know who I was without a crisis to manage, she admitted. Surviving had given me purpose. Thriving felt empty at first. She had to grieve the survivor version of herself, honor all that part had done to keep her alive, thank it for its service, then consciously choose to let it rest, to discover who she could be when she wasn't just trying to make it through. This transition often involves an identity crisis. Who are you when you're not in survival mode? What do you actually enjoy when you're not just trying to avoid pain? What dreams have been on hold while you were just trying to survive? Building emotional resilience is like strengthening a muscle. It happens slowly, through consistent practice. There will be setbacks, days when your window feels narrow again, moments when survival mode takes over. This is normal, not failure. Michael experienced this during his recovery. After months of progress, a job loss triggered all his old patterns. Panic, catastrophizing, the familiar spiral of survival thinking. I thought I was back to square one, he said. But my therapist helped me see that I noticed the spiral immediately. I reached for my tools. I asked for help. Even in crisis, I was responding differently. This is what resilience looks like. Not never falling, but knowing how to get back up. Not never feeling overwhelmed, but having practices to return to center. Not living without challenges, but meeting challenges from a place of resource rather than depletion. The capacity to thrive grows slowly, almost imperceptibly. One day you realize you laughed without waiting for the other shoe to drop. You enjoyed success without immediately imagining disaster. You felt joy without the shadow of impending loss. Your nervous system has learned that good things can be trusted, that peace is safe, that you deserve to thrive, not just survive. Carry this with you as we close. Thriving is not about having a perfect life or never facing challenges. It's about building the internal resources to meet whatever comes with grace and groundedness. Every practice you do, every time you choose regulation over reaction, every moment you expand rather than contract, you're building the resilience that transforms survival into thriving. You've survived the worst. Now it's time to create your best. Chapter 9. The power of self-compassion. Being your own best friend. The voice inside your head has more power over your healing than any therapy, any medication, any external intervention. What if the harshest critic you'll ever face, lives not in the world outside, but in the mirror of your own mind? Let's explore together how transforming self-criticism into self-compassion becomes the cornerstone of lasting healing. Anna had achieved everything she thought would make her worthy. PhD by 30, published author, respected in her field. Yet every night she lay awake listening to a voice that cataloged her failures. Not smart enough, not thin enough, not successful enough. Never, ever enough. I wouldn't speak to my worst enemy the way I speak to myself, she told her therapist, tears streaming down her face. Why can't I stop being so cruel to myself? The answer lies in understanding that for many of us, self-criticism became a survival strategy. If we could criticize ourselves first, maybe others' criticism wouldn't hurt as much. If we could push ourselves harder, maybe we'd finally be good enough. If we could catch every flaw, maybe we'd finally be safe from rejection. But this internal critic, originally meant to protect us, becomes our cruelest abuser. It keeps us trapped in cycles of shame, preventing the very healing we seek. The antidote isn't more criticism or higher standards. It's something that feels radical, even dangerous to those of us raised on perfectionism: self-compassion. Dr. Kristen Chen has spent decades researching self-compassion, and her findings are revolutionary. People who practice self-compassion don't become lazy or self-indulgent, as our inner critics warn. They become more motivated, more resilient, more capable of growth. Why? Because shame shuts us down. Compassion opens us up. Self-compassion has three components. First, mindfulness, the ability to observe our pain without over-identifying with it. Second, common humanity, recognizing that suffering is part of the human experience, not evidence of our unique failure. Third, self-kindness, treating ourselves with the same care we'd offer a good friend. Mark discovered the power of this through a simple exercise. His therapist asked him to write down the words his inner critic used. The list was brutal: failure, worthless, pathetic, weak. Then she asked, "Would you say these things to a friend going through what you're going through?" The answer was immediate. Never. I'd tell them they're doing their best, that healing takes time, that they deserve patience and kindness. Then why? His therapist asked gently. Do you deserve less compassion than you'd give a friend? The journey from self-criticism to self-compassion often begins with awareness. Most of us are so used to our inner critic that we don't even notice its constant commentary. It's like living next to a highway. Eventually, you stop hearing the traffic. Sarah started by simply noticing. Every time the critical voice arose, she'd place her hand on her heart and acknowledge, this is a moment of suffering, not judging the critic, not fighting it, just noticing. What she discovered shocked her. The voice was nearly constant, criticizing her parenting at breakfast, attacking her work performance by lunch, shaming her body at dinner, an endless stream of judgment that left no room for peace. But awareness created space between her and the voice, space to choose differently. She began to see the critic not as truth, but as an old recording, played on repeat by a scared part of her psyche still trying to earn love through perfection. One powerful practice is speaking to yourself as you would to a beloved child. This isn't about being patronizing or ignoring real problems. It's about addressing yourself with fundamental kindness. Jennifer struggled with this at first. Her inner child felt too wounded, too angry to approach with gentleness. So she started with imagining a friend's child, a sweet 5-year-old who'd made a mistake. How would she speak to that child? It's okay, sweetheart. Everyone makes mistakes. That's how we learn. You're still wonderful, even when things go wrong. Slowly, she began directing these words inward. When she forgot an important meeting, instead of the usual barrage of criticism, she tried, "Oh, honey, you're juggling so much. Of course, things slip sometimes. What do you need to support yourself better? The shift felt seismic. Problems still needed solving, but they could be solved from a place of support rather than shame. Mistakes became opportunities to practice compassion rather than evidence of unworthiness. The inner critic often speaks in absolutes. Always. Never. Everyone. No one. These words create a prison of perfectionism where one mistake means total failure, where one rejection means universal unworthiness. David learned to challenge these absolutes with what he called compassionate accuracy. When his critic said, "You always mess up relationships," he'd respond with specifics. "I'm struggling in this relationship. I've also maintained friendships for 20 years. I'm learning and growing." This isn't positive thinking or denial. It's refusing to let the critic's distortions become your reality. It's insisting on nuance in a mind that wants to paint everything black or white. The practice requires patience. The critic has had years, maybe decades, to strengthen its voice. Compassion needs time to grow strong enough to counter it. Some days, the best you can do is notice the criticism without believing it. That's enough. That's progress. Self-compassion also means honoring your needs without apology. For those of us trained to put everyone else first, this feels selfish, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care isn't selfish. It's necessary. Maria learned this after her third burnout. She'd spent years being everyone's rock, the reliable employee, the always available friend, the mother who never said no, until her body said no for her, landing her in the hospital with stress-related illness. Recovery meant learning to treat her needs as valid. Rest wasn't lazy. Boundaries weren't mean. Saying no wasn't selfish. These were acts of self-compassion that allowed her to show up sustainably for others. She developed what she called compassionate check-ins. 3 times a day, she'd pause and ask, "What do I need right now?" Sometimes it was water. Sometimes it was a walk. Sometimes it was to cry. By honoring these needs without judgment, she began rebuilding trust with herself. The practice of self-compassion often brings up grief. Grief for all the years spent under the critic's harsh rule. Grief for the person you might have been with more kindness. Grief for the love you deserved but didn't receive, especially from yourself. Robert felt this acutely when he began practicing self-compassion in his 60s. "I've wasted so much time hating myself," he wept. "Decades of self-punishment for crimes I didn't even commit." His therapist reminded him that grief is part of healing, that mourning the past is how we make room for a different future, that it's never too late to become your own good parent, your own best friend, your own compassionate companion. Robert began writing letters to his younger self, to the boy who was told he was too sensitive, to the teenager who felt he'd never fit in, to the young man who thought love had to be earned through achievement. Each letter was an act of retroactive compassion, healing old wounds with present kindness. The transformation that comes with self-compassion is profound. When you stop spending energy fighting yourself, that energy becomes available for growth. When shame loosens its grip, creativity flows. When self-criticism quiets, you can finally hear your own wisdom. Lisa experienced this in her art. For years, her inner critic had paralyzed her creativity. Every brushstroke was wrong. Every piece was garbage. The critic was so loud she stopped creating altogether. Self-compassion reopened the door. She gave herself permission to create imperfectly, to make bad art, to play without product. The critic still commented, but now she'd respond, "Thank you for trying to protect me from judgment. I'm safe to create freely now." Her art transformed. Not because her technique suddenly improved, but because she was creating from joy rather than fear, from expression rather than perfection, from a place of "I get to" rather than "I have to." Building self-compassion is like tending a garden. You plant seeds with every kind word to yourself. You water them with patience. You pull the weeds of criticism gently, knowing they're trying to protect you in misguided ways. Slowly, something beautiful grows. Some days you'll forget to be compassionate. The critic will take over, and you'll realize hours later that you've been mentally beating yourself up. This is when self-compassion matters most. Can you be compassionate about your lack of compassion? Can you forgive yourself for forgetting to forgive yourself? This is the ultimate practice. Meeting every part of yourself, even the critic, with understanding. Knowing that all parts of you are trying to help, even when their methods cause harm. Offering kindness to the parts that learned criticism was safety. Loving yourself not in spite of your struggles, but including them. My final invitation for you is this. Place your hand on your heart right now. Feel it beating. That heart has carried you through every difficult moment. It has never given up on you. Can you offer it the compassion it deserves? Can you speak to yourself with the kindness you'd show a dear friend? Your healing depends not on being perfect, but on being gentle with your imperfection. The voice that matters most is your own. Make it a kind one. Chapter 10. Healthy boundaries. Protecting your healing journey. Boundaries are not walls that shut people out, but bridges that allow authentic connection to flow. As we explore this vital chapter together, you'll discover why saying no to others often means saying yes to yourself, and how protecting your energy becomes an act of love, not selfishness. Rachel stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, agreeing to yet another favor she didn't have time for. As she hung up, exhaustion washed over her. This was the fourth request this week she'd said yes to while her own needs piled up unmet. Her body ached, her to-do list overflowed, her soul felt depleted. "Why can't I just say no?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer lived in her childhood, where love came with conditions, where being helpful meant being worthy, where other people's needs always trumped her own. She'd learned that boundaries were selfish, that good people gave until it hurt, then kept giving. But here's what no one told Rachel. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential. They're not about keeping people out, but about defining where you end and others begin. They're the foundation of healthy relationships, including the one with yourself. Understanding boundaries begins with recognizing you have the right to them. This sounds simple, but proves revolutionary for those raised to be boundaryless. Every human being has the right to physical space, emotional safety, time for themselves, and energy preservation. Dr. Marcus Williams explains boundaries through a powerful metaphor. Imagine your life force as water in a well. Without boundaries, everyone can take as much as they want. Eventually, the well runs dry, and no one gets water, including you. Boundaries are like managing the flow. Everyone still gets water, but sustainably. Thomas discovered his well had run dry after his divorce. Years of giving everything to save a failing marriage had left him empty. He couldn't understand why helping others now felt like lifting mountains, why every request triggered resentment, why he fantasized about disappearing. His therapist introduced a radical concept: emotional bankruptcy. "You've been operating in deficit for so long," she explained, "that your system has nothing left to give. Recovery means learning to protect your resources while they replenish." The journey to healthy boundaries often begins with recognizing boundary violations you've normalized. These can be subtle. The friend who always turns conversations back to their problems. The family member who comments on your body. The colleague who expects immediate responses to late-night texts. Sarah mapped her boundary violations and was shocked by what she found. Her mother called daily with crises. Her ex-husband still expected emotional support. Her boss assumed she'd work weekends. Her friends treated her like an unpaid therapist. No wonder she felt drained. "I realized I'd become a 24/7 emotional gas station," she said. "Always open, always giving, never refueling. But recognizing violations is only the first step. The real work lies in learning to set and maintain boundaries, especially when everything in your conditioning screams that doing so is wrong. Setting boundaries requires language and practice. Many of us literally don't have the words. We've never learned how to say no without elaborate excuses, how to state needs without apology, how to protect ourselves without aggression. Lisa developed what she called her boundary script library. Simple phrases she could use when caught off guard. I need to check my schedule. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I'll have to get back to you. At first, using these phrases felt like speaking a foreign language. Her voice shook, her heart raced, every no felt like betrayal. But she persisted, reminding herself that discomfort didn't mean she was doing something wrong. It meant she was doing something new. The pushback came quickly. People accustomed to her endless availability didn't appreciate the change. You've changed, they said accusingly. You're not the same person anymore. Thank God, Lisa thought. That person was dying. One of the hardest aspects of boundaries is dealing with guilt. The voice that says you're being mean, selfish, difficult. This guilt isn't evidence that boundaries are wrong. It's evidence of how deeply you've internalized others' needs as more important than your own. Michael battled this guilt when he stopped lending money to his brother. For years, he'd been the family ATM, enabling his brother's poor choices while struggling financially himself. Setting this boundary felt like abandoning family. His support group helped him reframe. You're not responsible for your brother's choices. You're responsible for your own well-being. Enabling isn't love. Sometimes the most loving thing is to let people experience consequences. The guilt didn't disappear overnight. But Michael learned to sit with it, to breathe through it, to remind himself that guilt was just an emotion, not a verdict. That he could feel guilty and still maintain his boundary. That his brother's anger was not his responsibility to fix. Boundaries in healing spaces deserve special attention. When you're working on trauma, your vulnerability increases. You need extra protection around your process. This might mean limiting contact with people who trigger you, taking breaks from social media, saying no to events that deplete you. Jennifer learned this after sharing her healing journey with a friend who responded with judgment. You're dwelling on the past, the friend said. Just move on already. The words sent Jennifer spiraling for days. She realized she needed boundaries around her healing. Not everyone deserved access to her vulnerability. Not everyone had earned the right to comment on her process. She began practicing discernment, sharing her journey only with those who demonstrated capacity to hold space without fixing, judging, or minimizing. This wasn't about secrecy or isolation. It was about protecting the tender shoots of new growth until they were strong enough to weather storms. The relationship between boundaries and energy is direct. Every boundary violation drains you. Every maintained boundary preserves you. This isn't metaphorical, it's physiological. Your nervous system registers boundary violations as threats, triggering stress responses that exhaust your resources. Patricia tracked her energy levels in relation to boundaries and found clear patterns. Days with multiple boundary crossings left her exhausted. Days with clear boundaries left her energized. The correlation was undeniable. She began treating boundaries as energy management. Before agreeing to anything, she'd ask, "Do I have the energy for this? Will this deplete or nourish me? What will I have to sacrifice to say yes?" This wasn't about never doing things for others. It was about conscious choice rather than automatic compliance. About giving from overflow rather than deficit. About sustainable generosity rather than martyrdom. Boundaries with yourself matter too. The promises you make to yourself and keep. The standards you set for self-treatment. The limits you place on self-destructive behaviors. These internal boundaries are often hardest to maintain. Robert struggled with this around work. He'd promise himself to stop at 6 p.m., then find himself answering emails at midnight. He'd commit to lunch breaks, then eat at his desk. He'd vow to take weekends off, then spend them catching up. I realized I'd never trust anyone who broke promises to me as consistently as I broke them to myself, he reflected. How could I expect others to respect my boundaries when I didn't respect my own? He started small, one real lunch break per week, phone off by 9 p.m. one night. These seemed tiny, but they were revolutionary. He was teaching himself that his commitments to himself mattered, that his well-being was worth protecting. The fear of abandonment often underlies boundary struggles. If I say no, they'll leave. If I have needs, I'll be too much. If I protect myself, I'll end up alone. These fears, usually rooted in early experiences, keep us trapped in boundaryless patterns. Maria faced this fear when setting boundaries with her mother. Every attempt triggered panic. What if her mother cut her off? What if she lost her family? The little girl inside her who'd learned love was conditional screamed in terror. But Maria persisted, supported by therapy and friends who'd walked this path. Yes, her mother was angry. Yes, relationships changed. But something unexpected happened. The relationships that survived became healthier, and new relationships, built on mutual respect rather than extraction, began forming. I lost some people, Maria admitted. But I found myself, and I found others who could love me without consuming me. Healthy boundaries are flexible, not rigid. They respond to context, energy levels, and genuine need. They're about conscious choice, not automatic rules. They protect without isolating, preserve without hoarding. As you build boundaries, expect resistance, both internal and external. Expect guilt, expect fear, expect people to test your limits. This is normal. This is part of the process. Every time you maintain a boundary despite discomfort, you build the muscle of self-protection. Remember, too, that boundaries are learned through practice, not perfection. You'll overcompensate sometimes, building walls where you meant to build gates. You'll underprotect sometimes, letting violations slide. This is how you learn your own edges, how you find your own balance. Let me leave you with this profound truth. Your boundaries are not negotiable. Your well-being is not selfish. Your energy is not infinite. Protecting your healing journey is not just your right, but your responsibility. Every boundary you set is a declaration that you matter, that your healing matters, that the person you're becoming deserves protection while they grow. The world needs the healed version of you, and boundaries are how you ensure that person has the space to emerge. Chapter 11. Finding your authentic self. Beyond the trauma. Who were you before the world told you who to be? Beneath the layers of adaptation, survival, and others' expectations lives your true self, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. This transformative chapter will guide you through the sacred journey of peeling back the masks to reveal the authentic person you've always been. Catherine sat in her walk-in closet, surrounded by clothes that felt like costumes. The corporate suits that screamed success. The casual wear that tried too hard to seem relaxed. The evening dresses that belonged to someone she was pretending to be. At 47, she realized she had no idea what she actually liked to wear. I don't even know if I prefer coffee or tea, she confessed to her therapist. I've been drinking coffee for 20 years because my ex-husband made it every morning. Who am I when I'm not trying to be what others need? This is the hidden cost of trauma and adaptation. In learning to survive, we often lose ourselves. We become shapeshifters, reading the room and morphing into whatever version keeps us safe, until one day, we realize we've forgotten who we are beneath all the masks. But here's the beautiful truth. Your authentic self never left. It's been there all along, like a patient friend waiting for you to feel safe enough to return home to yourself. The journey to authenticity often begins with recognizing the false selves we've created. These aren't lies or deceptions. They're survival strategies. The people pleaser who learned that being agreeable meant being safe. The overachiever who discovered that success earned love. The rebel who found that pushing people away hurt less than being rejected. Dr. James Rivera calls these adaptive selves. They served a purpose. They kept you safe in unsafe situations. But what protects you in a storm can suffocate you in sunshine. The armor that saved you can become the prison that constrains you. Marcus discovered his adaptive selves during a life transition. After his divorce, he didn't know how to be. For 20 years, he'd been successful husband. Before that, dutiful son. Before that, star athlete. Each identity had been carefully constructed to earn approval, avoid conflict, secure love. I felt like an actor who'd forgotten they were acting, he explained. Except I couldn't remember who I was before I started playing these roles. Rediscovering authenticity requires archaeology of the self, digging through layers of conditioning to find the bedrock of who you truly are. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about uncovering who you've always been. Sarah began this excavation through a simple practice, noticing her genuine responses before her conditioned ones kicked in. When someone asked her opinion, what arose before she calculated the right answer? When choosing activities, what pulled her before she considered others' expectations? The discoveries surprised her. She actually hated parties, despite being known as social. She loved solitary morning walks, though she'd always scheduled early meetings. She preferred silence to small talk, depth to surface, creation to consumption. It was like meeting myself for the first time, she marveled. This quiet, creative, contemplative person had been there all along, buried under who I thought I should be. The fear of authenticity runs deep. If people knew the real me, would they still love me? If I stopped performing, would I still have value? If I removed the masks, would anyone want to stay? These fears make sense. Many of us learned early that our authentic selves were too much, not enough, or simply wrong. We received love for performance, not presence, approval for achievement, not existence, connection for compliance, not truth. Elena faced these fears when she started expressing her real opinions at work. For years, she'd been the agreeable one, supporting others' ideas while suppressing her own. When she finally spoke her innovative thoughts in a meeting, the silence felt deafening. But then something shifted. A colleague said, "I've been waiting years to hear what you really think." Her authenticity, rather than driving people away, attracted those hungry for realness in a world of facades. Discovering your authentic self involves experimenting with what therapists call behavioral tests, small actions that express your truth and observe what happens. These aren't grand gestures, but tiny rebellions against your conditioned self. David started by changing his coffee order. For years, he'd ordered black coffee because it seemed masculine, but he actually preferred it with cream and sugar. Such a small thing, yet ordering what he actually wanted felt revolutionary. These experiments expanded, wearing colors he liked rather than safe neutrals, listening to music that moved him rather than what was cool, saying, "I don't know," instead of pretending expertise. Each authentic choice was a vote for his true self. "I was amazed that the world didn't end when I stopped pretending," he reflected. "Most people didn't even notice, and those who did mostly responded with relief, like they'd been waiting for me to get real." Authenticity doesn't mean sharing everything with everyone. It means being genuine in what you do share. It's about alignment between inner experience and outer expression, not about having no boundaries or filters. Patricia learned this distinction after swinging from people-pleasing to oversharing. In her eagerness to be authentic, she'd dump her entire inner world on anyone who'd listen. This wasn't authenticity. It was another performance, the role of totally honest person. True authenticity involved discernment, sharing her truth with those who'd earned the right to hear it. being genuine without being boundaryless, expressing her real self while respecting context and relationships. She developed what she called authentic boundaries. Being real didn't mean telling her boss about her childhood trauma. It meant no longer pretending to love projects she hated. Being genuine didn't require revealing every thought. It meant no longer saying yes when she meant no. The path to authenticity often involves grieving who you might have been. When you realize how much of life you've lived as someone else, sadness arises. All those years of disconnection from self, all those choices made from fear rather than truth. Michael experienced this grief intensely. Looking back, he saw decades of decisions made to please his father, career chosen for approval, marriage entered for acceptability, dreams abandoned for security. At 50, he was successful by every external measure and empty by every internal one. I mourned the artist I never let myself become, he said. The travels I didn't take, the love I didn't pursue, the life I didn't live because I was too busy living someone else's. But grief, fully felt, transforms into freedom. In mourning who he wasn't, Michael created space for who he could still become. Authenticity has no expiration date. It's never too late to come home to yourself. Living authentically requires courage, but it also requires practice. You're building new neural pathways, replacing decades of conditioning. There will be moments when the old patterns feel easier, safer, more familiar. This is normal. Jennifer found her authenticity through creative expression. She'd always wanted to paint, but had been told she wasn't talented. At 42, she bought watercolors and began. Her paintings weren't masterpieces, but they were hers. Each brushstroke was a declaration of her right to create without permission. The practice expanded beyond art. She started dressing in ways that expressed her inner bohemian, speaking in her natural, animated way rather than the controlled professional voice she'd cultivated, choosing friends who celebrated rather than tolerated her intensity. I stopped asking, "What will they think?" and started asking, "What feels true?" she explained. That shift changed everything. The paradox of authenticity is that when you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you become something real to the right people. When you risk being yourself, you attract those who resonate with your frequency. When you drop the performance, you find genuine connection. Robert discovered this in dating after divorce. Years of being who he thought women wanted had led to empty relationships. When he started showing up as himself, quirks and all, something shifted. Yes, some people weren't interested, but those who were interested in him, not his performance. I'd rather be alone as myself than together as someone else, he decided. And ironically, that decision led to the deepest relationship he'd ever known. Living authentically doesn't mean you'll never adapt or compromise. It means these adjustments come from choice rather than fear, from wisdom rather than wounds, from love rather than lack. As we prepare to close this chapter, I invite you to consider: what small step toward authenticity can you take today? What tiny truth can you tell? What minute mask can you lower? Your authentic self isn't some perfect version waiting in the future. It's who you are right now, beneath the fear, beyond the performance. Every moment offers a choice: hide or reveal, perform or presence, fear or truth. Choose truth, even in small doses. The world doesn't need another copy. It needs the original you. Chapter 12. Your New Beginning, Living with an Open Heart. Here we stand together at the threshold of your new life, where healing transforms from a destination into a way of being. This final chapter celebrates not an ending, but a commencement, showing you how to live with a heart that's been broken open rather than broken apart. Strong enough now to hold both joy and sorrow, courage and vulnerability in the beautiful paradox of being fully human. Maria stood at the edge of the ocean, tears mixing with salt spray. But these weren't the desperate tears of 2 years ago, when she'd stood in this same spot, convinced life would never feel worth living again. These were tears of awe, of gratitude, of recognizing how far she'd traveled, not in miles, but in healing. "I'm not the same person who stood here before," she whispered to the waves. "That woman was drowning. This woman has learned to swim." The journey from that moment to this had been neither straight nor simple. There were days she'd felt she was moving backward, nights when old patterns seemed stronger than new learning, moments when giving up felt easier than going on. But she'd persisted, and here she stood, not perfect, not cured, but whole in a way that included her brokenness, strong in a way that honored her vulnerability, open in a way that had transformed her wounds into wisdom. This is what a new beginning looks like. Not a fairy tale ending where all pain disappears, but a real-life transformation where pain becomes one thread in a larger tapestry of meaning. Living with an open heart after trauma is an act of tremendous courage. It means choosing to remain soft in a world that gave you every reason to harden. It means risking love when you know how much loss hurts. It means trusting life when life has betrayed that trust before. Dr. Sarah Chen explains this through the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. "The breaks aren't hidden or disguised," she says. "They're honored. They become part of the beauty." This is what happens when we heal properly. Our breaks become our strength. Thomas discovered this truth in his own life. After childhood abuse and a brutal divorce, he'd sworn off vulnerability, built walls so high no pain could enter, but no love could either. His safety had become his prison. The journey back to openness was terrifying. Each lowered defense felt like stepping off a cliff. But as he slowly, carefully began to open, something miraculous happened. Yes, he felt pain more acutely, but he also felt joy more deeply. Colors seemed brighter. Music moved him. Connection became possible. "I realized I hadn't been protecting myself from pain," he reflected. "I'd been protecting myself from life." Integration is the hallmark of true healing. Not forgetting what happened, but weaving it into the fabric of who you're becoming. Not pretending trauma didn't shape you, but refusing to let it define your limits. Jennifer exemplified this integration. 5 years after escaping domestic violence, she no longer introduced herself as a survivor, not because she denied her history, but because she'd become so much more. Teacher, artist, friend, volunteer. The trauma was part of her story, not her entire identity. She'd learned to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Yes, she'd been hurt. And yes, she was capable of deep trust. Yes, she'd known fear. And yes, she could access profound courage. Yes, she'd experienced the worst of humanity. And yes, she still believed in love. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," she shared. "Now I know it means remembering without drowning, carrying the lessons without the weight, honoring the journey without getting stuck in it." Maintaining progress requires what recovery communities call daily practices. Not because you're broken and need constant fixing, but because you're human and need consistent nourishment. Just as a garden needs regular tending, your healing needs ongoing attention. Robert developed his maintenance plan through trial and error. Morning meditation to start the day grounded, evening journaling to process and release, weekly therapy to stay accountable, monthly massage to keep his body open. These weren't luxuries. They were necessities, the infrastructure that supported his new way of being. But maintenance isn't rigid adherence to routines. It's responsive attention to what you need. Some days that's rest, some days it's movement, some days it's connection, some days it's solitude. The practice is staying attuned to yourself, responding with compassion to what arises. "I've learned the difference between self-care and self-maintenance," Robert explained. "Self-care is the special things. Self-maintenance is the daily choices that keep me healthy. Both matter, but maintenance is what makes transformation sustainable. Living with an open heart means accepting that healing isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. There will be times when old wounds resurface, anniversaries that bring grief, triggers that catch you off guard, moments when you feel you've lost all progress. Lisa faced this when her daughter reached the age Lisa had been when her trauma occurred. Suddenly, dormant pain reactivated. Old fears resurfaced. She felt like a fraud, preaching healing while struggling herself. Her therapist reminded her of a crucial truth. Healing isn't about never having hard days. It's about how you meet them. You're not starting over. You're going deeper. Each layer of healing prepares you for the next. Lisa learned to greet these resurgences with curiosity rather than defeat. What was this pain trying to tell her? What deeper healing was ready to happen? What new level of integration was possible? The spiral of healing doesn't mean you're going backward. It means you're going deeper. The gifts of your healing journey extend far beyond personal transformation. Every person who does their healing work becomes a lighthouse for others still lost in the storm. Not through preaching or fixing, but through being. Your very existence as someone who's transformed pain into purpose gives others permission to believe in their own possibility. Michael discovered this when he returned to his hometown. People who'd known him before could see the change. Not just external success, but internal peace. One by one, they began approaching him. How did you do it? What helped? Is it really possible to change? He realized his healing hadn't just been for him. It was for his children, who now had a model of emotional availability. For his siblings, who saw that family patterns could be broken. For his community, who witnessed that transformation was possible at any age. I thought healing was selfish, he admitted, but it might be the most generous thing I've ever done. Living with an open heart also means embracing the full spectrum of human experience, not seeking only joy while avoiding sorrow, not pursuing only comfort while rejecting growth, but saying yes to all of it, the light and shadow, the ease and struggle, the beauty and pain. Patricia embodied this full spectrum living. She could laugh with abandon and cry without shame. She could celebrate others' joy without comparison and hold space for their pain without fixing. She'd learned that an open heart isn't a happy heart, it's a whole heart, complete in its capacity to feel everything. I used to think healing meant I'd be happy all the time, she said. Now I know it means I can be present with whatever is. That's so much better than constant happiness. It's aliveness. This aliveness comes with responsibility. When you're no longer numbed by unhealed trauma, you feel not just your own pain, but the world's. This can be overwhelming, but it's also what connects you to the human family, what allows you to be of service, what transforms your wound into a source of compassion. As you step into your new beginning, remember that you're not leaving your past behind. You're integrating it. You're not becoming someone new. You're revealing who you've always been. You're not fixing yourself. You're coming home to yourself. The path forward won't always be clear. There will be days when the old ways call you back, when closing your heart seems safer than keeping it open, when you question whether all this healing work was worth it. In those moments, remember Maria at the ocean. Remember how far you've come. Remember that healing isn't about perfection, but about presence. Your new beginning doesn't promise a life without pain. It promises a life where pain no longer defines you, where joy is possible even alongside sorrow, where love feels worth the risk, where being human in all its messy glory is no longer something to survive, but something to celebrate. As we close not just this chapter, but this entire journey together, let me offer you this benediction. May you walk forward with a heart that's been broken open to love. May you carry your scars as proof of your strength, not shame. May you trust that every ending is also a beginning. And may you remember always that your healing matters, not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. The world needs hearts like yours, hearts that have known darkness and chosen light, hearts that have touched bottom and learned to rise, hearts brave enough to stay open in a world that gives us every reason to close. This is your new beginning, not an ending, but a commencement. Welcome to the rest of your beautiful, broken, whole life. You've just completed a powerful journey through 12 chapters of reflection, healing, and transformation. If these words touched you, if even one moment made you breathe deeper, think differently, or feel something shift inside you, then this journey is already working. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in whispers, in the quiet moments when you choose to keep going. So take this with you. Let these chapters echo in your heart. Let them remind you, you are not broken. You are becoming. If this journey helped you, please consider subscribing to this channel. There are more healing experiences coming soon, and you're not alone. Until next time, breathe, believe, and begin again.